news is just the beginning.
Welcome to Energy Forward, the Future of Alternative Energy virtual event. I'm Ben Gieman, energy reporter at Axios, and I'm coming to you from our offices in Arlington, Virginia. Thank you to GE for making this conversation possible on the future of alternative energy, and welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. Please join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and the hashtag #AxiosEvents. Over the next 30 minutes, as part of our Energy Forward series, we'll discuss innovations in alternative energy, from developments in technologies to increased momentum around hydrogen and nuclear power, and the impacts they'll make this year and beyond. Our first guest is Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, joining us from Washington, D.C. Senator, thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me on, Ben.
Absolutely. Senator, when it comes to renewables, I think people perhaps think of other areas of the country, but the nation's first big commercial scale offshore wind farm is happening right off of your state's coast. And I wanted to ask, what does offshore wind mean for the state of Massachusetts?
Well, offshore wind for us is going to mean somewhere ultimately between 5 and 10,000 megawatts being installed off of our coastline, creating ultimately tens of thousands of new jobs. It's all there. The potential is there. They can be union jobs, and they'll answer the question, which for many years was being raised by critics. Well, yeah, wind is good, solar is good, but it can't replace nuclear. It can't replace fossil fuels. Well, we're doing it. And we're answering the question of what happens after the Pilgrim nuclear power plant shuts down. What happens after Seabrook nuclear power plant shuts down? How do we substitute for natural gas coming into Massachusetts and New England? Wind is going to play a big part of it, and we will capture it off of our coastline, bring it in, and superconducting wires plug it into our coastline and power the homes and the industries of our state. And we're very enthusiastic about it. And we think we can do even more, even faster than the schedule calls for right now. President Biden has called for 30,000 megawatts for the whole East Coast by 2030. We think that's just a small percentage of what ultimately is possible.
Yeah, there's huge resources off both the East and the West Coast. So I know there's a lot of excitement that this industry is finally sort of taking flight in Massachusetts. But Senator, of course, so much of your career has been aimed at sort of spreading the benefits and bringing clean power, not just to the coast, but to multiple different parts of the country. And, right now, I think this conversation is really well timed because we're seeing this dual track negotiation over infrastructure in Congress. So I wanted to ask, as this goes forward, what are your top clean energy priorities that you think can corral enough votes in these infrastructure negotiations?
Well, number one is that we need a plan which dramatically reduces greenhouse gases across our country. Secondly, we have to have a plan which creates millions of new clean energy union jobs in our country. And thirdly, we have to do it with environmental justice. We have to make sure that we create the jobs, but do so with justice. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I introduced the Green New Deal, now 2.5 years ago, that was at the center of what we were talking about. And increasingly, it's become the consensus inside of the Democratic Party. And my belief is that if we do this right, that we can center justice at a program that creates jobs in the poorest communities in our country, in the most diverse communities in our country, in the communities that have always been most adversely impacted by environmental issues. So that's my goal, and I'm very heartened by the package which President Biden has put forward. The same thing is true for what Bernie Sanders is talking about and for what Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are talking about. I think we're on the cusp of doing something historically big to make sure that every community in our country gets the jobs and the environmental justice which they deserve.
You, in fact, have been quite explicit in using the phrase "no climate, no deal" to describe your posture in these talks. Can you tell us, what does that mean specifically? For Senator, for you, what are the must-haves, both in terms of energy investment and from a sort of policy standpoint, that you and sort of like-minded climate-conscious senators need to see in this to get your votes?
Well, I would say that First, I support Bernie Sanders in his advocacy for $6 trillion. I think we have to think bold. We have to think big if we're going to be able to accomplish the goals which we've laid out. We also have to make sure that, as Senator Wyden is proposing, that there's a 10-year tax break out there for clean energy technologies. One of the things which is leading to an explosion in offshore wind is the 5-year, 30% tax break, which Senator Whitehouse and I, working with Senator Wyden, was able to put on the books in December of 2020. We have to do that across all clean energy technologies. We also need a climate core, a civilian climate core, and it's got to be big. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and I, we're asking for $130 billion in order to make sure that we could have at least 1 million young people who are working in this sector. But without question, we cannot finish any legislation without a civilian climate corps and a climate bank as well. We need a bank that gives easy access at low interest rates to small businesses, to individuals, to municipal governments, housing authorities all across this country, because for every dollar that we're able to loan to one of those entities, it will unleash $7 to $8 in private sector investment, upwards of $500 billion to $750 billion worth of private sector investment. So I'm very much insistent that we have a climate bank that does work at the heart of anything which ultimately is put on President Biden's desk.
Thank you. And, as we look ahead to these negotiations, I'd kind of like to flash back as well. I was there, of course, in 2009 when a sweeping climate and energy bill that you co-authored passed the House, but then it did not advance in the Senate. I guess I'd like to ask, how would you compare the politics of climate in 2021 compared to that 2009-2010 period?
Thank you, Ben. Well, back in 2009, Henry Waxman and I were the two key chairmen in the House. We worked very hard, and within a 6-month period, we were able to pass what is now, in retrospect, called the Waxman-Markey bill, which was an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2050. And we partnered very closely with Speaker Pelosi at that time. It then died in the Senate. They needed 60 votes to get it passed, and they just sputtered and could not reach that goal because of a concerted effort by the fossil fuel industry. The GOP stands for Gas and Oil Party, and they blocked it. So what I decided was we needed a movement, and that's what I did with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in introducing the Green New Deal. Now, climate is right at the top of the list of most important issues. Back in 2009, we had the inside power, but not a movement. Now we have both. We have the House, the Senate, the presidency, and we also have a movement. So time is of the essence. We have to move quickly. The lesson I learned in 2009 was the Republicans will try to run out the clock. So from my perspective, we have to do a bipartisan deal and the reconciliation bill at the same time. The trains have to come into the station at the same time. We have to be guaranteed that this time we put in place the policies that are necessary in order to make the United States the leader once again on all of these issues. And the fires, the floods, the high temperatures all across our country are just once again making it very clear that we have a planet that is running a fever, and there are no emergency rooms for planets. And we have to act with the preventative care that we know we can pass and put on President Biden's desk within the next couple of months.
Yes, certainly we've been seeing these stunning and very tragic heat waves and fires and other aspects of extreme weather that you've been discussing. I suppose in raw political terms, do you feel like that is changing anything? Are those perhaps, not that you would want to sort of have benefit from tragedy, I guess, but that said, do you think in very raw political terms, that's changing the vote calculus for any members when it comes to these sweeping investments and policies that you're seeking?
Well, I would hope on the Republican side that would be the case, but again, the fossil fuel industry plays a very powerful role on that side of the aisle. But I think that the polling indicates, especially amongst younger Republicans, that they do believe the science and they do believe something should happen. So, yes, over the last 12 years, since 2009, when they defeated Ed Markey on the Senate floor, the evidence is now overwhelming. And the damage which occurs on a yearly basis is now in the hundreds of billions of dollars and mounting. So the cost of not acting is much, much, much higher than the cost of acting. We have to engage in this preventative. From my perspective, I would hope that the politics of our country has changed, but it seems to me that the Republicans are saying we can work on a bipartisan basis on building bridges and roads. Well, we're going to have a hard time working with you when it comes to climate. So the Democrats are going to have to find a way of coming together to have the 50 votes with Kamala Harris breaking the tie that allows us to put these transformative policies on the statute books of the United States.
Thank you. And one final question for you, Senator. Looking ahead to this fall, we have, of course, this crucial United Nations Climate Summit coming up in Glasgow in November. Now, Senator, I know you're a veteran of these UN summits. How important, if you can get to this threshold, this vote threshold, how important is it that this package pass before these talks begin? Will that affect the U.S. posture in Glasgow if there is a bill signed, or if the bill fails? What impact would that have on these talks?
Well, many nations in the world are reluctant to act in the first place. And after 4 years of Donald Trump, they're clearly going to be even more skeptical. So if the United States is going to be the leader, we have to pass this legislation. You cannot preach temperance from a bar stool. You cannot tell the rest of the world that they should reduce their emissions if we ourselves are not leading the way. So the passage of all of this legislation is the precondition to a successful summit where President Biden is able to say to the leaders in the leading industrialized countries in the world that they too have to partner with us in order to save the planet. But first, the Congress must act, or else the president will not have enough on the table in order to persuade them that the United States is serious about these issues.
Well, Senator, I think that sets the stage very well for what's coming up both on Capitol Hill and at the UN summit later on in the fall. So, Senator Ed Markey, thanks so much for joining Axios today.
No, love being with you. Thank you.
And next, we have a View from the Top segment with my colleague, co-founder and CEO at Axios, Jim Vandehei.
Thank you for joining us from A View from the Top. I'm Jim Vandehei, the CEO at Axios. And joining us live from Paris, France, is Jérôme Pécresse, who is the Senior Vice President at GE and CEO of GE Renewable Energy. Jérôme, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. And it's great to be with you today and to discuss the energy transition.
Top of the agenda for the Biden administration, big news was this idea of approving an offshore wind farm project in Massachusetts. It's one project, one city, but I think it starts to unlock the potential of wind as an energy in the U.S. How should we think about that? How big could this be as it starts to expand?
You are spot on, Jim. I clearly think about offshore wind as one of the two big things ahead for the U.S. energy system in the next 5 to 10 years. The second big thing, and we may come back on it, is how do you modernize the grid to get higher and higher renewable content into the electric system. But offshore wind is going to be a major change. We'll keep doing more onshore wind, we'll keep doing more solar, but offshore wind is a sector that now in the world is getting global fast. It's already very, very significant in Europe. In the US, there has been for some years a very large untapped potential along the eastern seaboard. And this unlocking of permitting of the Vineyard project by the administration is the first of, we think, many projects. There is a potential to do 10 gigawatts of projects before 2026, another 10 gigawatts before the end of the decade, and probably close to 100 gigawatts when you get to 2050. And that's a very meaningful amount of energy with much higher capacity factors than what you have onshore wind, which means that the turbines will produce electricity during a bigger and bigger part of the day. And it's something where there is a queue of projects by developers, customers. There is a very large potential for job creations. So it's coming, and it can really be very significant.
And when you think about the grid, I think most Americans don't pay attention to it until it's not working or until it's hacked. Like when you talk about having to modernize the grid, like help me understand, like what does that mean and why should the average US citizen care?
I think the grid is a hidden bottleneck of the energy transition now. In the US and elsewhere, if you want to put more and more renewable into the system, first you need to extend the grid. So you will need new green technologies, I mean high voltage, to bring this electricity from the offshore wind farm to the shore. You will also need to extend the grid to use the massive wind potential you have in the US onshore in the Midwest and bring it back to the load centers. So there is a crying need to extend the grid. Then you need to modernize the grid, and then you need to secure the grid, meaning you need to have the grid working in a much more reactive way. I mean, when you have these energy renewable sources which are variable and intermittent, you need to protect the grid from cyber security attacks. And you have, without getting technical, some consideration links to inertia, which change when you move to a big content of fossil fuels to a big content of renewable. So all this requires investment in software, in hardware, in equipment, and we expect a big part of the infrastructure package from the Biden administration to be directed exactly to that, to the modernization and expansion of the grid, and that's going to unlock more potential for renewable energy in the US.
Some hear renewable fuels, renewable energy, and they worry that, hey, I might be in the fossil fuel industry, or I might be in a job that's dependent on that, and that could be a threat to it. How do you see the mix in terms of fossil fuels and more traditional types of energy and these new promising but still relatively young technologies in wind and solar and others? What is the right mix?
I think it will be a transition. The mix will evolve over time. And for many, many years and some decades, we'll see a combination of three things. We'll see renewable electricity growing and being a bigger and bigger part of the mix, from 15 to 30 to 50% over time. We will see gas playing a big role as a fuel which will allow to balance the system and accompany the growth of renewable. And that's going to be the case in the US and in many other places, in particular as coal fades away, and nuclear will be a part of that equation as well. And then we will see the grid transforming itself to accommodate this evolution of the mix and play a role, in particular by connecting different grids together. You can deal with the variability issues over bigger and bigger part in the US or more and more European countries. So you will see these three dynamics: renewable, gas, and grid.
And you spend a lot of time looking at these technologies. What are some of the more exciting ideas out there that you think we're close to that are going to unlock a lot more potential for wind, for solar, or for energies we might not even be thinking of today?
I think, it's true that at GE we are probably uniquely positioned because we play across all the segments I mentioned: renewable, gas, grid hardware, grid software. We also have very interesting development we look at in places like hydrogen. So our mix of products and technical expertise position us quite well. As you know, at GE, innovation is in our DNA, starting with Thomas Edison a long time ago. And we want to build a world that works. And the energy transition for us is a unique opportunity to deploy that. So when you look at the next 10 years, I would say offshore wind in the US as clearly the big thing ahead and something which is going to transform the system and create jobs. When you look at the next 30 years, probably then you get to hydrogen. That can be used to decarbonize the whole system and create additional demand for renewable with green hydrogen.
Jérôme Pécresse, appreciate this conversation, appreciate GE making this broader conversation about renewable energy possible.
Thank you, Jim. It was a pleasure. Have a good day.
Thank you. And over to you, Ben.
Our final guest is the CEO at the American Clean Power Association, Heather Zichal, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Hey, Heather.
Hey, Ben. Good to be here.
Thanks for being with us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so let's just jump in here. Heather, early in the pandemic, the renewable sector, like many sectors, was really affected by supply chain problems and other logistical hurdles. But it turns out that additions of new generating capacity in the US or really worldwide were still quite high. So does that mean the effect of COVID was less than feared, or would the growth have actually been even larger absent this tragic pandemic?
Well, Ben, as you point out, last year was a banner year, whether it was wind, solar, or storage deployment, and we're only going to continue to see growth in the clean power sector. As you point out, yes, it is like every other piece of the economy, the clean power sector was absolutely impacted by COVID and some of the supply chain challenges. But like many other industries, was very nimble. We're quick to address issues as we could, and make sure that we were deploying the clean energy that American businesses and customers are demanding. So, today we're at about 20% of the power sector is powered by clean energy, and I think you're only going to see that number continue to grow.
Definitely, and I wanted to ask about one of those sources that's right now very small in the U.S. but getting a lot of attention. We're finally seeing some large companies wanting to do offshore wind projects, and the White House has set this goal of having 30 gigawatts of capacity by 2030. But I mean, look, right now we're barely above zero. So is that target conservative or ambitious?
Well, we worked hand in hand with the Biden administration and the Department of Interior on those targets, and the industry backs the 30% goal 100%. We believe we have a huge opportunity with the existing pipeline of projects. Now that the administration is moving on those pending applications, we're seeing commitments for more steel. We're seeing commitments like Dominion to build a ship to actually construct the offshore wind turbines. So in addition to all the clean power the offshore wind industry can deploy, we're also going to be creating a whole series of new jobs and investment opportunities. And we couldn't be more excited about standing up offshore wind for the first time in this country. We shouldn't be behind the EU. We shouldn't be behind China in terms of deploying offshore wind. We want to be the leader, and this administration is helping position us to be just that.
Definitely. And, I think more broadly from the renewable standpoint and from a zero carbon power standpoint, this is a pretty important moment from a kind of policy perspective, right? I mean, we've got these infrastructure discussions happening on Capitol Hill, in addition to what the administration is doing under its executive powers. And certainly these infrastructure proposals have a lot of clean energy provisions. So I guess, I'd like to ask, what are your group's kind of primary goals as these infrastructure talks kind of come to a head on Capitol Hill?
Well, for starters, we're incredibly excited, and we view this as truly a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get more policies in place to support the deployment of clean energy, and that's exciting from my perspective, not only in the power sector, but we're looking at electrification, we're looking at the built environment. So as a climate advocate, it's really exciting to see sort of the holistic approach that Congress and the administration are taking. Our association, the American Clean Power Association, is really excited about the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the fact that we've got Democrats and Republicans working together specifically around transmission. If we aren't smart about our transmission policies, that could be the Achilles heel of deployment of clean energy. So, I think that's really important. And again, because we operate and we create jobs in all 50 states, we are in blue states, we are in red states, we are in purple states. So the opportunity to work on and identify bipartisan consensus areas is really important for our industry. And then secondarily, the broader reconciliation package and the conversations happening there. Priority number one for us is extension of the tax credits. We're really excited about engaging around the dialogue in the clean energy standard. But those tax credits and 100% refundability or / direct pay are going to continue to be our priorities as we're working on the reconciliation package.
Can you walk our readers through what the distinction is between the existing way that the credits work and how refundability or direct pay works? Because I know that that's really important, but I think is sometimes hard to get one's arms around.
Yeah, part of this actually kind of was underscored with the implications of COVID. We saw the tax equity markets, really dry up, and so as our member companies are looking to continue to invest in these projects, whether that's wind, solar storage, or some of the hybrid projects, wind plus storage, et cetera. The direct pay mechanism sort of addresses that key challenge that the tax equity markets have dried up. And we believe, with that provision itself, we're going to be able to drive a significant increase in deployment in clean energy in the power sector.
Definitely. And one of the other topics that we hear a lot about, and you referenced in your remarks just now, was this idea of a clean energy standard, which for our viewers would require zero carbon power to represent, a really significantly growing share of utilities retail power sales. One debate around the CES is whether it should credit only renewables or a wider set of zero carbon options, including nuclear power and natural gas with carbon capture, if that ever sort of comes to some type of commercial maturity or even a beachhead. Does the American Clean Power Association have a position there on how the CES should be constructed?
Well, for starters, I think the most important thing for our industry would be to have have certainty and predictability in our policies, right? Today, other than, you've got states taking a lot of robust actions, you've got individual corporate users driving a lot of demand, which is great. But we don't have the long-term certainty and predictability. In fact, most of our climate policies created in the tax code today. So a clean energy standard that would give us certainty and predictability out to 2025, 2030, that would be a game change for our industry. As far as what's in, what's out of the credit, and the conversations are just getting started, I think I'm excited about the opportunity to find, to land on a set of policies that are going to create that long-term certainty and predictability. And in the interim, I think we want to remain as nimble as possible. Like, we're dedicated 100% to deploying clean energy. That's wind, solar storage. That's what I work on every single day. But I also think we want to remain nimble and work with Congress as they're trying to figure out how, what's the path to getting all the votes that they need.
Definitely. So it sounds like there's some flexibility there with keeping your eye on the prize of just getting that certainty is the big thing.
Exactly.
I wanted to, in the time we have left, I wanted to look both backwards and forwards in a way, right? Because, you were in the Obama White House working on climate change and clean energy. And that was the last time there was a chance for a really sort of sweeping, transformational clean energy and climate package. And, it didn't happen in that period. I'd like to ask you, can you compare the politics of that kind of 2009, 2010 era to the kind of present moment that we're in?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question, and I know there's a lot of debate about whether or not this is 2009 again. And I mean, they're very different points in time, right? In 2009, when I was in the White House trying to figure out what do we need to do through the Recovery Act, and how do we make a significant down payment on Obama's climate vision? We were still afraid to even talk about double digits in the clean power in the power sector, right? We were hoping maybe we could get to 3 or 4%, and then you fast forward today, we're kind of, as an industry, we're grown up. We're $1 trillion part of the economy. We create jobs in all 50 states. And so as an industry, we've changed a lot. And I think that's important context. The second piece is, in 2009, we were dealing with, a very awful situation with the economic downturn. And now you've got, a similar situation, right? Where we're still trying to piece together and get back to, life post-COVID. So you've got those dimensions that are a little bit the same. But you also just had Congress and the United States Senate in particular come together and pass some really important pieces of legislation on a bipartisan basis. You've got a bipartisan conversation happening about, what can we get done in the power sector, for clean energy and power. And I think that creates a new and important dynamic and opportunity. And then I think the fact that you have, you've got Schumer, who's advocating at the highest level. You have Pelosi, who's advocating at the highest level, and the commitment that they've made to make sure that climate doesn't get left behind. And that's a new and really important dynamic for those of us in Washington that are trying to figure out, where is this journey really going to end on the legislative front? But having those pieces of the puzzle are the things, both politically and from a policy perspective, I think are so critically important and really make the dynamic significantly different than 2009.
Yeah, it sounds like we're in a completely different period from where things were, both politically and in terms of where the industry is at from a decade plus ago. Heather, thank you so much for joining Axios today.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. Thank you to our sponsor, GE, for making this event possible. For more information or to sign up for our newsletter, Axios Generate, visit axios.com/newsletters or on the Axios app. We hope to see you again for our next Energy Forward event during Climate Week this September. Thank you all again for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.